What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Bronx Pinstripe Show. Today, I'm going to talk to Andy Martino, author of The Yankee Way, the untold inside story of the Brian Cashman era. It's a really great book. As you will see throughout this episode, a lot of great tidbits that I was not aware of in being a Yankees fan my entire life, reading dozens of books about the team and about the organization. Just so many great little factoids around obviously the story of the past 30 years of the Yankees in the front office and the people in and around Brian Cashman. I had a really great time talking to Andy, as I always do, so stay tuned for that. But first, this episode is brought to you by Factor Meals. Factor literally saved my sanity over Memorial Day weekend. My air conditioning broke the Thursday night before Memorial Day weekend. So I spent Friday and Saturday talking to contractors on getting a replacement. Obviously, it's Memorial Day weekend, so things aren't, open, being able to deliver it. And so I had to deal with just a disgustingly hot household. And so being able to heat meals up quickly that also were delicious for myself while dealing with screaming kids and, like I said, the uncomfortably hot house was very, very nice and convenient. Factor meals take just 2 minutes to make and they taste great. Factor meals deliver high quality, fully prepared food to you. The process is very easy. You go on their website and choose from over 35 delicious meals each week. You can also customize your deliveries with 60 different add-ons. Highly skilled chefs prepare your food and deliver it to you. The food is always fresh and never frozen. Heating the meals up takes just 2 minutes. Then the best part, there is no mess or anything to clean up afterwards. Factor is no prep, no mess, just delicious food. Head to factormeals.com/Bronx50 and use code Bronx50 to get 50% off. That is half off. factormeals.com/BRONX50. Factormeals.com/Bronx50. Okay, joining the podcast now, Andy Martino, author of The Yankee Way. Holding it up right now for anyone watching. I just told him I really enjoyed it. I don't know. Has anyone ever said, nah, not really for me?
Well, on this one, I've gotten a nice response, but certainly plenty of what I've written over the years has been people have said, no, thanks, not for me. You suck. You should be fired. So, yes, I do get some of that,
Yeah.
but that's okay. Nature of the beast.
Yeah, I mean, I've joked with people. It's like you don't want people like at least have an opinion of my stuff. Like if you have no
Hmm.
opinion, then it's like I guess
Exactly
I guess
right.
I'm not interesting enough to even have an opinion about. Anyway, did your opinion of Brian Cashman change after going through this process at all? Because we've talked a lot about Brian Cashman in your handful of appearances on this podcast, and so I'm just curious,
Yeah.
have you changed your opinion? I'm not saying you had an opinion good or bad of him before, but just
Hmm.
how has that changed over the past year or so?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I can't say that that particular element of my thinking changed a ton because Uh, I knew the people around him. I knew the way that he was respected by his peers and competitors, and that's kind of what I wanted to go book length with. Of course, when you're reporting, you have to be open to being taken in a direction that you don't expect. But I guess the fact that I mean, plenty of things surprised me, and I learned plenty of things. But to this specific question, I guess the fact that I've been around Cashman for so many years and around the people who have been around him, I guess I knew how he was regarded, and I knew that he was. I know he's been an effective GM because the record speaks for itself, and so perhaps my pre-existing bias was only confirmed by my own reporting and thinking. But no, I think I came out with an enhanced and more detailed impression of why he's effective at his job, but not a dramatically different perception of that.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense because, when I think of Brian Cashman's career and reading through this book, like you even started the beginning of the book, you're like, a this is not a Brian Cashman book. This is a Yankee book. But like if you're talking about the Yankees over the past 30 years, like Brian Cashman is the central figure of that
Yep.
3 decade span. So it can't not be mostly about him and the people that have worked with him. But like if I think of like the defining moments of his career, I sort of pulled out these and let me know if you agree. Trading
Hmm.
for Roger Clemens, because even you pointed out like that takes balls. That team, that 98 team doesn't need to add to be they
Hmm.
were the greatest team ever, but he sensed maybe some complacency in that clubhouse and Roger Clemens was still a guy hunting his first championship. certainly brought a lot of controversy to the clubhouse because of how competitors sort of viewed him and that sort of thing. So that was one. Number two is when he nearly left after the '05 season and had to negotiate with George to give him full control of baseball
Hmm.
operations and stop
Hmm.
what you had referred to as the shadow. Was it the shadow front
The shadow
office?
front office in
Yeah,
Tampa. That was actually Gene Afterman term that how she described it, which is I thought was interesting.
which is was George in Tampa with his buddies, I guess, just
Basically,
flying by the seat of their pants, making decisions. Trading for Raul Mondesi, signing Gary Sheffield instead of Vlad Guerrero, and I'm sure the list goes on that aren't as high
yep.
profile as that. Moving on from Joe Girardi, I thought is
Mm.
is a huge one because they almost made the World Series and sort of went in a different way, and I thought that was interesting because he talked about his falling out with Girardi, just not seeing eye to eye, not seeing, and is sort of, you compared that to how it happened with Torrey, but in a sort of a different way.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting to pick that as one of the. I completely agree with you on the others points, and you surprised me with the last one. I'm not disagreeing with it. Certainly, the Clemens trade shows those that guts to be a 30-year-old GM and do an earthquake kind of trade at that time after the 98 season because Cashman's always been a good reporter in his own organization and he understood that the team wasn't as hungry as it had been before winning those two championships in 96 and 98. So that's a good one. The '05 one, you're absolutely right, cannot be overstated because the structure of the Yankee organization still flows from that reorg in '05 when Cashman turned down double the money to go run the Dodgers to stay with George Steinbrenner and get full control over baseball ops really for the first time, full control. So those are, I agree with you on those. The Girardi one, yeah, it was different than the Tory falling out. I don't know. I don't think you'd even call it a falling out with Girardi per se because almost immediately Cashman was trying to help Girardi get another job out of affection for the man and thinking he'd be good. Cashman's not going to put his name to a recommendation with another team without believing in it. So he likes Girardi. He thinks he's good. Uh, but there needs to be alignment between like all up and down an organizational chain, right? To that flow chart. And something happened in the 17 season. And I think it speaks to Cashman's loyalty to Girardi that I was actually unable in this particular case to get the full story.
Yeah.
That's something that's been protected because well they had basically they I believe I'm paraphrasing Cashman, but he told me they got out of alignment with something. It was something having to do with honesty and communication, and that happened during the 17 season. Cashman said, what happened was reparable, but Girardi chose not to try to repair it, so I moved on. I believe that's exactly what he said. Um, so Joe Girardi is somebody who was very guarding of what he considered to be secrets. It blew up in his face a couple times over the years, lying about injuries, and Cashman doesn't like that sort of thing. I'm not saying that's what happened in this case, but that's not really the Yankee way in a media relations perspective. I'm not saying that they're radically transparent by any stretch, but I am saying that Cashman believes that if you lie to the press, for example, about injuries like Girardi did a handful of times, you're just asking for more drama because reporters in New York are going to figure it out. Then you're going to look stupid. Even some of the secrecy around Aaron Judge potential injuries does not always.
You're talking
That's
about
not the way
after the home
Cashman.
run derby in 17, that
That
specifically,
one
or just in general with Judge's injury history?
generally, even this spring, it's like you've got middle body,
Oh
mid-spring
yeah,
general soreness.
yeah.
I those kinds of talking points are not Cashman's favorites even now because it's just like just tell them. That's usually his philosophy because it's going to get out anyway.
Hmm.
So anyway, he and Girardi were not always aligned on that, and I just think that it was a time in which that became too much. There was a specific thing that happened, as I said. Unlike with Tory, I don't have all the details on that. But the Yankees had decided to move on from Girardi during that season, no
Right.
matter what happened. Now, that was never tested, obviously, by winning the World Series. And that's a great unanswered question. Can you really move on if that were to happen? But that by the time they're in the playoffs, Cashman and Hal knew that Girardi would not be their manager the next year.
The reason I called this one of the big moments of his career is because it would have been such an easy sell to the public. Hey, we were a couple outs away from the World Series. We're going to continue to progress under this guy. That would have been a very easy thing to continue on. We're building towards something here. And instead, he took a left turn in the middle of that. So that's why I sort of call that a huge moment, because at that
It's
point,
interesting.
then he
Yeah.
brings in Aaron Boone, who in a lot of ways is the complete opposite of Joe Girardi, for better or for
Yeah.
worse. Like that's not what we're going to argue about right now, but
Objectively true.
the
Yes, they're very
complete
different.
opposite, completely different direction he's taking the team. Some players continue to progress. Some players, obviously they didn't progress, and really Aaron Judge is the only one from that team still with them at this point. So that's why I sort of thought of that as the other one. Maybe you want to call the moving on from Joe Torre too, but I thought you had so many great details in the book about why they moved on from Joe Torre and the falling out between Torre and Cashman, which I was not fully aware of.
Yeah.
And so just how I knew that clubhouse became broken, like this even came up, and I think in that was that the Tom Verducci Joe Torre book back. I read that
Yeah.
book way
So,
back in
yeah.
whatever year that was, talking about how there was the guys who won championships and guys who had never won championships, the big name free agents, and it was like Gary Sheffield's been very vocal about like that clubhouse was stale, and you walked in there
Yeah.
and it was like, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That, the Tory stuff, um, yes, we knew that the clubhouse was broken, and there's a lot going on there. The Jeter A-Rod dynamic was a huge part of it. The front office believing that Torrey and Jeter weren't being welcoming enough to the new guard of players, and all that. You're making me think about the Girardi stuff, though, and I give you credit, Andrew. We were talking before we started about how I've done a million interviews, and this is a topic that hasn't come up yet. It was a different falling out. For sure, and I don't think the Cashman Tory thing has never really been mended. But again, he and Girardi are, I don't want to say they're close, but Cashman is still protective of Girardi in that era. And you're right, it would have been the easiest sell to bring him back. But I think one of the reasons why I like that you pointed that out as an important moment in Cashman's career is that's really a good example of how he feels it's his responsibility to make difficult or even unpopular decisions if he's convicted that it's what's best for the organization. He's not really interested in the easy narrative or the thing that'll get you the best coverage in the moment, or what have you. He really believed that in order for the organization to move forward, he had to make the tough decision to move on from a manager who he liked personally. I mean, and you could argue, obviously they haven't been in a World Series since. Um, I would argue that it was the right decision for what that team needed at the time. I can see that that's not an objectively provable thing yet. I mean, it's clear to me covering the team that Aaron Boone is a fit in a way that Girardi was not. But uh, it's a if Boone were able to win a championship, that would settle that argument a little bit better, I think.
He is an
I
excellent
think you're
man.
a Girardi fan. I can tell by your face.
It's not that I'm a Girardi fan. It's that I'm not an Aaron Boone fan. Cashman of Boone. He's an excellent manager. He was a risk worth taking, and I really hope our fans will eventually realize that. I pulled out that quote from there that obviously Cashman said about Aaron Boone. The reason I'm not an Aaron Boone fan is because it really has nothing to do with the in game decisions, which I think he really has not improved that much over the
Okay.
6 years or whatever he's been manager. The same mistakes he was making in 2018 he's still making in 2023. It's more to do with the fact that I have not seen the clubhouse. When I say that, like, you're probably saying like, what the hell do you know, right? But like I watched
No,
it.
I'm not thinking
I
that.
follow the
Mhm.
team as closely as any fan can follow the team,
Sure.
and it's just like the tired narrative of we've got this, we're going to turn it around after the team is going through problems and seemingly the same problems season after season. I just don't feel that he was the right fit. I've seen too many players degress, not progress. Once Aaron Boone
Hmm.
got there, Aaron Judge aside, Gary Sanchez went into the oblivion. Gleyber Torres has not been as good of a player since he was
Mhm.
first called up. And then other guys with injuries, which I know you can't blame Boone. So it's not to do with me being a Girardi fan. It's more to be with me not being a Boone fan.
My reaction to what you said about those individual players is honestly, Andrew, that respectfully, I think you're overestimating the positive or negative impact a big league manager can have
Probably.
on an individual. They can create a general culture. They can make in-game moves, although really there aren't that many managers that make in-game moves that are that different from one another at this point in time in the game. There are a few
Yep.
outliers. Actually, Carlos Mendoza is one of them, who's uh, makes moves a little bit more based on reading the game than other managers that you see, and that's very impressive. But so moves, Boone to me, fine. I actually just I think he's improved since 18. I can see it in pitching changes and certain aggressiveness and hitting and run, hit and run plays and all kinds of things. I think he's managing a little bit, for lack of a better term, old school than he used to. Um, Subtly, not hugely.
Well, here's an
But
example I use of Aaron Boone. Do you remember the Game 4 of the Red Sox series in 2018 where he tried to stretch CC Sabathia through the bottom
well,
of the
that was
Red Sox lineup?
yes.
He
I don't
still
think he's that
he
manager
still
anymore.
does stuff like that though. He
Mm,
still tries to steal outs with guys. He did it earlier in the season in Milwaukee, and I'm only calling this out because I went on a rant about it with Luis Hill. He tried to steal an out with Luis Hill, and then they ended up costing him the game because Luis Hill was fried at that point. He was at like 90 something pitches. He tried to steal an out with him to save the bullpen, and it just didn't work. And so it's like,
well, I hear you. I hear you on that. It's interesting because the criticism often comes from the other direction, that you're not letting a guy pitch deep enough into a game. That's what I hear more from Yankee fans than what you're saying.
well,
Like,
it's
come
certain.
on, like, can anyone ever face the lineup the third time through? Like,
Well, they've
I
been
hear
doing
that
that a
on
little
Boone.
bit, but this
Yeah.
is about using your eyes. And what we saw is Luis Hill already give up 2 home runs in that game, and he was at 96 pitches, which was his season high to that point. He was out of gas. Like, use your
hmm
eyes. I could see that watching on TV.
I'm not going to invalidate that, or that particular critique. I think it's interesting, as I said. Like, he would probably argue if he were here that he's gotten better at pushing guys using his eyes and knowing when to make that move on gut rather than data. Not gut, but observation
Yeah,
rather than data.
yeah,
But and again, like with that stuff, it's tough. One of the reasons in my coverage that I very, 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 very rarely get into manager moves in terms of like my opinion of them is that we don't know if so and so, like Hamilton told Blake that he had a sore calf that day.
I
I'm
know.
making that up,
No, he did.
but is that actually true?
No, that was the game that, and this is the same game that Tonkin, who they just picked up from the
Yeah.
Mets or whatever, who they literally picked up on their way to Milwaukee, is in a game to try and save a game in Milwaukee. It was a
Yeah.
complete mess.
Right. Right. So the combination of managerial mistakes slash stuff we don't know, with like who's
Yeah,
up, who's down,
I know.
that's always a tough one, even as a reporter. I always appreciate as a reporter when a manager will tell me off the record, "Look, don't make a big deal out of this, but I don't have Ottavino today. I don't have Wandy
Yeah,
Peralta today. I'm using just random examples because and those are the things that don't often get announced, which is makes it very hard to do my job actually, let
right.
alone be a fan and critique these things. So
Well, it's easy as a
all that
fan.
being
You can
said,
just yell about something, and then you're just a passionate
yeah.
fan. You have to be an objective reporter.
And but these people aren't always right. That's for sure, and they would admit that. But right, the challenge is to gather the full information on people's health and availability to really understand that stuff. And Boone's pretty transparent, although he does lean on protecting guys. One of
Yep.
the only times Boone's ever been, I think, really annoyed with me, he doesn't get annoyed. I mean, he gets annoyed with umpires a lot, but with other human beings, not so much. He's a nice guy, and but early on a good exact example of this was in one of those games in 18 when he pushed his starters too far in the Red Sox series. He did it with CC. I think he did it with Severino too. In that
Well, that
series, if
was
I'm
the game
remembering
that
right.
Severino. There was a whole controversy about he didn't know the start time, and then
That was that
he was
series.
tipping pitches, and he gave up a ton of runs.
Okay. Well, anyway, the one I remember that too, but the one where he's pushing his starters too far. I heard from the front office, like, we're really grateful that Boone took the bullet for Zach Britton on this because Britton got an MRI on his Achilles or something, and he was down. And Britton was like, I so appreciate that he didn't announce that because I was going to be a free agent.
Hmm.
And I would have gone into the off season as damaged goods. And the next spring, I remember this. I was sitting down to do an on-camera interview with Boone for SNY, and I said, "Just a heads up, I'm going to ask you about Britton being down that day because he appreciated it. It's an example of how your guys appreciate you." And he looked at me like, and then a couple moments passed, and he's like, "How did you find that out?" He was pissed.
Oh,
You know,
really?
yeah, like, God, that was supposed to be in house, that kind of thing. Because the most important, and then when I was like, don't worry, it was said to me in a positive way. But the most important thing to him in the world is protecting Britain's secret there,
Yeah.
because obviously he's a player. He knows what you want to hear from the manager, and that's his way of building the trust. So he has the credibility to have difficult conversations in his office. I mean, speaking of Britain, there's the quote from him near the one in the book, near the one that you read to me from Cashman, where he says, "I know people want him to. I know this isn't what you're talking about. You're talking about in-game moves, but he's like, I know people want Boone to rip somebody sometimes.
Yep.
Stop saying that everything's going to be okay, but he's never going to do that at a press conference. Even in a team meeting, you will see the guy that yells at umpires come out, that anger, that passion. Boone's actually got a real edge to him, uh, and but he's never going to embarrass somebody. Even within the team meetings, it'll be the group this, the group that. This is unacceptable, and then so and so will be in his office. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've heard that uh, Boone, Mendoza, and Glaber Torres were in that office going over the stuff that Torres was doing, trying to help him get better, being tough but kind, and those are the things that we don't see, that I even don't find out about, as often as they happen.
So, trying not to go too far down a Boone rabbit hole here, but we're talking about how Cashman's ability to assess what's going on with his team and his clubhouse, and if something is leaning the wrong way, he's going to make a change. So if Boone is never going to be a guy that rips anyone, which I am fully understand at this point, he's never going to call someone out publicly, one of his players. Maybe that's not what the team needs, though. And clearly that's not what Cashman thinks and what the organization thinks, because they haven't made a change yet with Boone. But to use the Glaber Torres example, it's now year 7 of his career, and we're still talking about the same mental mistakes that
Hmm.
this player makes. So maybe talking to him behind closed doors is not getting through to him. And I'm not saying ripping him in public is the way to
Yeah,
get through to him, but they have tried to fix Glaber's mistakes one way. I'm done hoping that Glaber Torres is going to fix those mistakes. He's going to be a free agent this year, and I don't think the Yankees are going to sign him after the year. I don't think he's ever going to be the type of player that is, fundamentally sound on the field.
yeah. What we don't know is, did they get more out of him with their approach than they would have otherwise?
Sure,
Would he
that's
be in the big leagues? Would he have had the all-star
he's
seasons he
very
had?
talented. I mean,
I understand that, but I'm just saying, like, the variables of, you could find an imperfect
and
person or player, and get, maybe they're squeezing more out of him than a tough guy would. That's a very hard thing to know.
maybe
Maybe not, but that's their job, is to really know these people on a
right.
very deep level and sense what they need. And I don't think we can conclude that that Aaron Boone hasn't gotten more out of Glaber Torres than any manager would. I don't think we can conclude the other either, because we've only had this one sample. But that would be my thought about that. And to your question about Cashman, absolutely. If Cashman ever figured out, like, this is not what our clubhouse needs. This guy, this style, he would make that tough decision to move on. He is cold like that.
Yeah.
So there's no question. I think it's very telling that when uh, Boone's status was being publicly speculated on late last year, the groundswell of support that came from leaders in the clubhouse to Hal Steinbrenner for him really tells you something.
Yep.
I'll tell you a little backstory of, I wrote this has nothing to do with the book, but I wrote a news story quoting Aaron Judge last September, saying, "I want Boone back," which at the time was kind of newsy because he hadn't weighed in at that point.
Hmm.
So I go up to Aaron Judge. This is somebody who I understand. It's not that it's not that he's actually averse to saying things that are opinionated, but he's very careful and selective. He picks his moments. So I was like, off the record, my recorder's not on. I'm going to ask you about Boone. Um, And if you don't want to talk about it, I'll just walk away. Don't worry about it. I won't be like, Judge refused to comment. Just, whatever. And he's like, no, I want to talk about this. And okay. And he's like, Boone's my guy, all on the record. He's a guy for this team. And Judge has a really good feel. He stays connected with his teammates in a very meaningful way. He has a really good feel for that group. Now, is he the arbiter of what everyone needs? Does he know all? No, like of course not. No one would. But no one. I haven't seen a clubhouse leader that has as good a feel as Judge for the whole room. And he was so strong in his conviction that Boone needed to come back, was the right guy, and that was felt in the organization too. The Yankees feel, the front office feels that Boone had his best year last year. They thought he saved jobs, like a lot of people's jobs, because that thing was going in a really bad direction.
Yep.
And the fact that they finished 82 and 80 with the way they wrapped it up in September. I mean, Dominguez was good. Like before the surgery, there's a lot of reasons why they got a little hotter, but they were like, our manager really helped steady this ship. And if you look at the players that we gave him by the end of the year, the fact that we ended up over 500, that guy saved people's livelihoods by holding it together. So that's how they felt. So they're far from feeling like, oh, he's the wrong guy.
Do you believe if they actually finished 80 and 82 instead of 82 and 80, Boone would have been fired? Because remember, Hal said, "Oh, if we're not 500," and at the time, I was like, "What's the difference between
Yeah,
80 and 82 and 82 and 80? It's a bad season regardless."
boy, that's tough to say. Depends how bad it would have been.
Yeah.
80 and 82, I think probably he's back. I don't know. It's a hypothetical. It's like if they won the World Series in 17,
That's
what
why
happens
it's
to
it's it
Girardi?
was silly for Hal to say it though, frankly, because at the point he said it, it was like at some point in mid-August when they were really really
Yeah.
bad and clearly not going to make the playoffs. So at that point, like I don't see much of a difference between 78, 80, 82 wins at that point.
No, that's fair. At that point, when Hell said that, if it was August, or so, I don't remember exactly off the top of my head, but he wasn't sure until much later in the season, if not the end of the season, what he wanted to do about Boone. He had to do his homework.
Yeah.
He had to ask people other than just Cashman, like Judge, like Cole. Hal's doing his own reporting on what's going on, and determined by about the end of the season, certainly, that Boone was part of the potential solution and not the problem. But yeah, if the messaging evolved on that a little, I would say he was still figuring out where he stood on it.
So back to your point about Cashman being cold-blooded, because I definitely think that's something that you could sense from the book.
Hmm.
He he there was a quote he said about George Steinbrenner that the dynasty ended in like the start of the dynasty ended when George didn't replace
Yeah,
the
the
firings with
beats.
quality people.
That was a very surprising piece of insight. In Cashman's estimation, the beginning of the end of the dynasty came in 1995,
Right.
which is a much earlier date than most people would have
They hadn't
assumed.
even won
That's right.
yet. Yeah.
That's right.
Because of the people that George, because after George came back from his suspension in the early 90s, um and that was also a weird time because they had the strike year and then they went into a deep playoff run. But he wasn't just talking. Cashman wasn't just talking about Buck Showalter though. He was talking about Gene Michaels out as general manager, and then some head scouts got let go, and some of these people that you shed light on being instrumental. Bill Livesley was one name
Yeah,
I
yeah,
had
yeah.
not heard of before. So like I learned about Bill Livesley and like his impact on the organization from this book, and quote the building the Yankee way, which was apparently literally a book in the 80s,
Literally, yeah. Yep.
but turned into everyone probably has a different opinion on what the Yankee way means at this
Hmm.
point, but
But now we know objectively what it
yeah,
is. It's a binder
right,
from 1989 to 90. Yeah, and that was the stuff that group that developed that. Uh, Obviously, like in player development, what was going on in Fort Lauderdale and then Tampa in the 80s into the 90s with I can't overemphasize enough what Bill Livesey did for that organization. How when Cashman has got the red ass about like the story that's told about this team is wrong. A big part of that is Livesey not getting the credit he deserves for. I mean, the philosophies that he developed in these incredible meetings at their complex in late 80s Glenn Sherlock, who's now a Mets coach, who was a young coach who was there, would talk about they spent hours and hours and hours on which side of your body should you catch a pop up. And at point Sherlock's like, oh my God, whatever side. But they were so detailed, and they're developing this stuff, which is literally influencing decisions that they are still making about players, which is unprecedented in this sport, that you'd have that kind of continuity of philosophy. So these people, Livesey, Mitch Lukovitz, uh, Cashman was working with them by the early 90s down in Tampa. Brian Sabian, who was gone by 93, I believe, to go run the Giants. Showalter's the least of it. And Gene Michael is sort of the least of it, too, because he was still at
He
least
was
in the
still around the
organization.
organization, right?
Um, but the people who built this thing and who set up the teams and the philosophy for that run in the 90s were gone mostly by 96. And it's a poignant thing because you talk to Livesey, who's still alive, who's in his 80s. He was like, you just want to, after all that work, you just want to be able to stand off to the side of these guys who are celebrating in a dog pile or what have you,
Yeah.
and say, God damn, those guys got it done, and I never got that chance. And how after hours and hours and hours after Charlie Hayes catches that pop up and everyone's celebrating and champagne and through the night and everything, Cashman calls Livesey of all the people he could have called and says thank you,
Yeah.
because that was how this dynasty was assembled. So the teams that you get in 01, 02, 03, that's when sort of that steam had run out. But the problem was created in 95.
Yeah, no, it was a great point that I had not seen made before because exactly, it's literally if you compare it to the Buster Olney book, The Last Night of the Yankees Dynasty, which was the 2001 World Series, like Cashman is saying, no, actually the groundwork for that was laid many 6 years earlier than that. So that was a really
And Buster's
cool
book was
point.
so good. And I think that's I'm glad you drew that parallel, because that's the same point, like 20 years later. And I mean, Buster's book had a different focus, and so I spent a little more time on some Livesey and some
Hmm.
of those people other than Gene Michael. But that's the same idea, is
Yeah.
exactly that it was built, that foundation was built, and is still, again, it's been adapted a million ways over for the analytics age, and as ideas evolve. But it's basically like, if you want to know why they thought, I don't know, that they should swap Luke Voigt for Rizzo, uh,
Go back to
because,
what
well,
Livesey
because
was talking about in his how they scouted players. No, that was really cool stuff that
yeah.
for to get sales pitchy for the book, like there's so many cool little details like that I as big a Yankees fan as you're gonna find had not come across before, so definitely
Well,
worth it
that's
for that.
nice to hear. I mean, yeah, that was fascinating to hear this stuff. I think Cashman and others. I mean, as you said at the beginning, it's not Cashman's book. He didn't. Like, obviously, I wasn't ghostwriting for him. He didn't want that. I didn't want that. But he definitely feels strongly and has this idea that he wants known that this is the real story.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting to hear about.
Couple other things I want to talk to you about. So the Jeter A-Rod stuff. To be honest, Jeter didn't come off well in this book. I don't know if you
Hmm.
meant to do that, but and it was obviously you're just writing what probably people in the organization were saying, but by the 2000s, certainly after A-Rod was traded there, Jeter just seemed very standoffish in his own world in the clubhouse. That is one of the things that Cashman sensed why he needed to not only move on from Torrey, but then bring in CC Sabathia and AJ Burnett and Nick Swisher in the 2009 season. But that whole drama between Jeter and A-Rod doesn't seem like it's ever been settled and ever will be settled. And Cashman didn't really understand the full complexities of it when he acquired A-Rod.
Yeah, he knew that there was some tension, but he didn't know it was about to become his primary management challenge for about a decade. But immediately in that spring training, well, even before the spring training, just before when they had the press conference, Jeter looked miserable.
Yeah.
Uh,
I
and
remember
and the
that.
pair,
I remember that being headlines like at the time in
yeah,
2004, like in on the New York Post back page, whatever it was, just like the Jeter death stare.
yeah, and they denied at the time. Jeter's like, "Oh, you media, you want to make it like it's a problem. It's fine." Uh, Obviously, it wasn't fine. The depth of it was startling. I mean, there's some things, like, for example, not that this is real, but the fact that it was even raised when a couple years later, when the Post caught A Rod with the mystery blonde in Toronto, and Stray Rod was, I think, the front page, not even the back page. Uh, there was like a little clubhouse rumor started, like, oh, Jeter tipped off the photographers,
It's crazy.
and he
No, I
didn't,
know he
but
didn't, but it's
yeah,
crazy that
but
that was
yeah,
sensed in the
that was
clubhouse.
even a
Like,
thing.
God, I got to imagine guys coming into that clubhouse, especially like younger players at the time, being like A-Rod and Jeter, and then you get there and it's like, holy shit, these guys hate each
It's
other,
really
and it's
bad.
very
Yeah.
obvious they hate each other.
it was it was almost like a cold war, because there's times, and we watched those games over those years, there's times when they seem to have a measure of chemistry between them, but so, and it's not like they ever had like a shouting match that anyone's ever heard of, certainly that I haven't. So hate might be a strong word, but like just this chilly vibe where guys would, like you said, guys would come in and be like, whoa, this is tense. There's that quote from Coulter Bean in the book where he's saying the quote, it's about the Tory thing, but he also says you had Jeter, A-Rod, Giambi, like all these stars, and the second media left the clubhouse after a game, everyone just scattered. There's
Yeah,
no
it's
chemistry.
bad.
Yeah, and that was the case, and that's probably why these teams that were very talented and very good in the regular season, but did ultimately underachieve in terms of
I know you made
October's.
that point, but go look at
Well,
those.
Coulter Bean made that point.
But go look at those pitching staffs. That's why they didn't win. Okay.
Fair enough. Fair enough. But they were not. If there's an ineffable
Yes.
quality to whatever that undefinable chemistry thing is, those groups didn't have it, and the '09 team did.
'09 team did. I thought surprisingly the '07 team did still, because that team was very hot in the second half of the season. I think they went
Hmm.
8-0 against Boston in the second half of that season, and
Mm-hmm.
who knows if Torrey pulls the team off the field with the midges, maybe they
Yeah.
win that
Yeah.
game and things are differently, right? Like that's another what if that
Well,
we're never
that's
gonna
a good
know.
point, and it goes to show the limits of the chemistry argument that could be made, because it's like, yeah, chemistry, blah blah blah, but midges,
No,
or
but
but
like I do
pitching,
think
or
that team did end up. A Rod was otherworldly that year.
yeah.
Posada was on another planet. I think Posada hit like 330 something that year. Jabba
Mm-hmm.
comes in, brings a new young
That jolt of energy. Yeah.
energy into the clubhouse they hadn't had. I mean, Clemens is back. I don't know what that does for a clubhouse. I know he wasn't great, but
He was very well
I think
liked.
he's very well. He was a very good clubhouse presence still. So
Hmm.
I don't know. I think that team probably did have more chemistry than maybe the
Yeah,
04, 5, 6 teams, from what
I
I
think that's a
remember.
good point. I was actually there early in my career when they clinched the wild card in '07 in Tampa, and I remember the celebration being very exuberant and rowdy, and
Yeah.
young guys like Cano and Melky Cabrera
Oh yeah, I
were
didn't even mention
pouring
them.
champagne all over A-Rod, and that was a part of where A-Rod sort of found his niche. Granted, he opted out a month later during the World Series, but he was, if he wasn't welcomed in '04, '05, once the Canoas and the Cabreras and guys like that started to come around, like Larry Bowa told me, that's when Alex kind of found his voice, because these young kids look up to him. And for all A Rod's complications and complexities, he would be out at 8:30 in the morning doing drills
Mhm.
with Larry Bowa and Cano. I mean, he was
And
interested in
Jeter
mentoring them.
wasn't, and so that was a. I mean, it kind of me reading the book from what you're talking to these inside the Yankees organization people, like it didn't seem like they thought Jeter was an effective leader at that point in his career.
Yeah, the front office certainly didn't. It's, I tried my best to present all sides of it, and I didn't intend, to your original question, to make him look bad. I just reported what I
I
learned.
didn't think you
But
intended that. It's just
yeah,
that's how I.
it's the way it
Yeah,
looks potentially. Yeah, I get that. And there are people that were like, he was the greatest leader I've ever been around. There are people who say that, and I don't discount that. But a fact is that everybody says that. It seems to be kind of a clicky thing in a way, or like Gene Afterman said, after '04, around that time, they developed an artificial class system in the clubhouse.
yeah,
You'd won in the '90s or you hadn't. So there's no, and Cashman would go to Jeter and say, "You're the captain of everybody," and Jeter even allowed this to be told to an extent in his own documentary. So there's no question that this was a real dynamic. And Jeter finally, in that 2021, I think, is when the captain came out, or 22, um, opened up about his own issues with letting people in and
yeah.
trusting people, and so it. But if it took 15, 20 years for him to have that reflection, obviously that wasn't something that was helping at the time in the mid 2000s when that clubhouse wasn't great.
And I know like the Captain documentary also talked about this. The Cashman Jeter falling out was really more about the free agency in 20 after the 20 was that after the 2010 season, the Jeter
Yeah.
free agency. But like, I have to imagine like seeds are being planted in the
Oh,
04
yeah.
to 09 time frame, just like, and part of me thinks like, okay, Cashman wants to move on from A-Rod after he opts out of his contract. It's not just because he doesn't want to sign an aging player to a 10-year contract. It's probably also because like, I just need to get this guy out of my fucking clubhouse at this point because Jeter's going nowhere. And so
Hmm.
if A-Rod's going to opt out, like maybe that's sort of a get out of jail free card there.
Maybe. That's an interesting question. He didn't tell me that. Um, I mean, at that point, it's probably the most top of mind thing is like no GM ever wants someone to have a 10-year contract on his roster. Pretty much, this is
Sure.
not not something that helps you be flexible for the next decade. So that might be part of it. The chemistry part, who knows how Cashman calculated it in that time. But certainly, you're right that the seeds were planted. It blew up in the free agent negotiation after 2010. But it was '06 or '07 that Jeter walks up to Cashman in the stadium and said, "Hey, I hear you're talking shit about me." And Cashman says, "Well, if talking shit means your lateral range, if it declining, if it means that some of your own teammates who you won championships with are expressing concerns to me about your leadership, then yeah, I've said that to your face." So not a lot of people talk to Jeter that way, and Cashman felt, hey, listen, some people are lying to you because you're Derek Jeter and they want access
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. But I'm not going to do that. That goes into the cold-blooded side, and Cashman's not cold-blooded as a human. He's close with his kids and nice to people and stuff, but in his job, in his view of his job, it's like, if it's my job to confront Derek Jeter about your lateral range or what your teammates are saying, I'm gonna do it. And Jeter probably didn't love that, and it all blows up like you point out that the low point is then a couple of years later in 2010
And even
when
bled
Jeter.
into when Jeter's with the Marlins won't even call Cashman about the
How about
Stanton
that?
thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was
MLB
interesting.
has to MLB has to get involved and say, call him. Jeez, because the way trades work is you call who you know. It's like a human thing. That's why Omar Minaya did so much of the Soto trade with AJ Preller in San Diego. They worked together in that front office. It's just like, why wouldn't you talk to the person you know? But what the Yankees were getting from the Marlins during the Stanton stuff was Cashman needs to talk to Michael Hill. That's the GM. It's not appropriate for him to talk on the ownership level to Jeter. It's like, come on. That's not a direct
Next
quote.
level grudge from Jeter.
Yeah,
But
yeah. But Jeter does approach him in a Hall of Fame ceremony
yep.
and says, "Now I'm on the other side. I'm in management. I get it. Thank you for what you did for my career." So, it did, and evolve to another place after that. But I'm not saying that they started having monthly lunches following that.
Yeah. So I pulled out 4 or 5 fun other tidbits just randomly, and I want to just mention them to you, and you can say something about it, or we can move on if you don't think it's interesting.
Sure.
George would move players' families tickets to the upper deck if they weren't
I love
playing
that.
well. That's perhaps my favorite one from the book.
Oh God, me too. Maybe I love the
What a
Tommy
son of a
John story.
bitch.
I know, and I think the way Cashman described it to me was, um, like George's mindset was, if you're gonna shit the bed on me, I'm gonna screw your fucking families.
It's insane.
So Tommy John with Sally John is up in the nosebleeds, and Tommy John has to come up from the clubhouse in his uniform and his spikes in this elevator that's carrying fans to the suites, ready to rip into George Steinbrenner because his what Tommy John's wife is mad at him. So Tommy John's got to go yell at George. I mean, boy, that when people romanticize the George years, that's part of it too. That kind
Mhm.
of stuff.
Yeah, I know. It's easy to romanticize George because you think of the championships and the big free agents, and like to his credit, he would never say no to signing a big free agent if he thought it could if he thought it could help the team win. But yeah, all that other crazy stuff certainly did not help the team win, I'm sure.
No,
Buck Showalter would make at-home spray charts on players like all the way back in the early '90s, like before spray charts were even a thing.
'80s actually, even when
'80s,
he was in the minor leagues.
so he
Yeah.
could position fielders, and he was doing that even into his Baltimore days. Like Buck Showalter, I know he's regarded as a baseball genius, but like a lot of things in here really point that out.
Yes, unbelievable court vision Buck Showalter has. We were talking before about how managers basically all manage a very similar way. I would say, obviously, Showalter is one of the outliers in game stuff. Mendoza is growing into that very quickly. Alex Cora is someone who you could look at that way. Probably Bochy, but absolutely Showalter has that, and that's where he got his back up a little when the game changed, and even when he was interviewing for the Mets job, he's being asked, "Well, but will you accept analytics?" And Showalter's like, "Analytics? I was doing that with my wife Angela in Albany in
Yeah.
1983.
Yeah.
It's a spray chart." So I think that goes to show how things can be thought of as new when in fact they're sometimes new presentations of time tested ideas,
Right. Bernie apparently would leave his family at the stadium just for forgetting they were
I
there.
love you are this is great. You are pulling out things, you do these interviews and it tends to be like similar things that are noticed. You are pointing out things, Andrew, that have not been pointed out yet. So this is
I mean,
fun for
I've read
me.
a freaking 100 Yankee books at this point, so when someone tells me Bernie Williams would leave his family there, I haven't read that before. That's fun.
I mean, he just a sweet-natured, absent-minded person, I guess.
Yeah.
Who else played air guitar in center field at Yankee Stadium too when his mind wandered?
Yeah.
And yeah, you'd get home, you'd be like, "Oh, right." You call Andy Pettit, be like, Andy, could you take my kid home? I forgot him." That kind of stuff.
I
He's just
taught
head in the clouds.
Yeah, I talked to Bernie on this podcast 2 years ago. Really, I mean, really fun conversation. Super nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's a funny one.
Mm-hmm.
David Wells, when he was fined by Torrey for wearing the hat, paid him in single dollar bills,
In
$2,500.
single-dollar bills. How about that?
Not surprising.
And not surprising, funny, but I will say that Wells was a great example of like how internal and external perception can be quite different about people.
Yeah.
Tori and Mel Stottlemyre could not stand David Wells. Cashman likes him. They're still friends. I mean, I don't want to say they're like tight, but when Wells is around, they enjoy each other.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's right. He paid the whole thing. Was it $2,500? I think the fine. Yeah, you paid it in 2,500 singles, and one can only assume where he got the singles.
um, an interesting alternate side to the Clemens Piazza stuff, which I had not seen written because I've never read a Mets book, but maybe this is in Mets books, is that the Mets clubhouse actually, it affected them negatively because they thought Piazza should have fought back to Clemens, where Piazza is a very reserved guy, always going to say the right thing in the media, but they're like, dude, like this guy is
Yeah.
throwing at your head, throwing a bat at you, show some fire here.
Yeah, and there's an anonymous quote about that, and people thought it was Mike Hampton, and so that whether it was or not, it's unprovable, I guess.
Yeah.
But uh, that was something that did roil the Mets clubhouse. You're right. And another little funny piece of that I learned was just young Jim Duquette and Omar Minaya in the Mets front office in the seats for that game, screaming at Lenny Harris to punch Clemens
Yeah.
because Clemens is going to hit back.
You're right.
Get him out of the game.
Get
Who
him.
cares
Yeah.
if Lenny Harris is ejected?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it
Exactly.
just didn't hear them or something. So
Yeah.
I like that little detail about the fight too. I mean, that is a memory that I wasn't in the business yet, but just
Oh yeah.
that moment in New York baseball. I mean, does it possibly get more dramatic than that? Just incredible stuff.
I was 13 at that time. I remember watching that on TV. I'll never forget that. Never forget that.
Yeah,
And then he pitched like 8
yeah,
shutout innings.
incredible on every level. Going into the clubhouse and crying. I didn't mean to do that. Like completely out of his mind.
Oh yeah.
And then somehow locking into to that. That shows you how the ability to focus that pretty much every major league baseball player has if you've gotten to that level is unreal. Like you have a bad thing happen to you, a humiliating thing. Maybe that just ruins the rest of your day if you're a normal person, or
Yeah.
like your job performance for the rest of that day, or you can't focus. So it's pretty amazing that he was able to regroup and do that. There's so many examples of that among players. I mean, even just a couple of weeks ago, Francisco Lindor, I'm covering a Mets game, and he's got a terrible stomach flu, and he's doing everything you do with the stomach flu, and he comes out and he gets like the game-winning hit. It's like, dude, why didn't you stay home? Like you're puking,
Yeah.
you're getting an IV. These guys are on another level with that.
Yeah. And sometimes if it's immediate and if it's the next day, maybe it affects you differently. But like in that day, in that moment, you're able to lock in. Yeah, it's pretty
Yeah.
crazy. And the last thing that I loved, I mean, one of the other things I loved, Gene Michael, just in the '09 World Series, like the Phillies front office like, don't wear Yankee stuff because you're gonna get
Yeah.
heckled. And Gene Michael's like, no, I'm fine, guys. And he just
Yeah, he
comes
shows
decked out.
up, tall guy, decked out, Yankees leather jacket, Yankees everything. Some Philly guy is screaming at him, and he just turns around. You've got a bad mouth, and
Yeah,
then shuts the guy up. Stands down the bully. I mean, if anyone could stand down a bully, it's Gene Michael after all those decades
yeah,
of
yeah.
George Steinbrenner. And so drunken Phillies fan is that's like small potatoes
Easy.
for him.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I appreciate very much the details that you noticed in the book because those are fun things for me. Those little nuggets
Yeah.
that don't get headlines, those are fun.
Yeah, those are very fun. That's anything else you want to touch on
Oh
this?
man,
Things you
uh,
think I missed? I mean, there's a lot of other stuff, but these are some of my favorites.
yeah, those are great. I mean, I think, well, you along the lines of the things you're noticing, Steinbrenner noticing Gene Michael for the first time because of the hot dog in his glove, or Gene
Oh
Michael's
yeah,
scared of bugs.
yeah.
So his teammate puts a hot dog in his glove, and that he screams, and George Steinbrenner calls a state trooper to investigate who put the hot dog in his infielder's glove, and stuff like that is fun. I liked the one. This one isn't a funny story, but I found it so fascinating. Where in 1986, when Cashman's an intern, the way that the front office and the coaching staff are getting their minor league information is a Cashman transcribing
Yeah.
a answering machine message from the manager of every affiliate. You know, Kevin Moss was 1 for 4 last night with a walk, and made a play in the field, and then writing it down. And literally, that's how you're getting your information. And so for this same man to be still in the game when there's high speed cameras in every affiliate capturing every motion, and every rotation of spin on every pitch at every affiliate, it's just an amazing example of the transformation of the game in this time. So that one sticks out for me. I like the stuff about young Cashman breaking the horse. I found that interesting to learn how a
Oh
horse is broken. I
yeah.
didn't know about that. So there's all kinds of stuff like that. And then as it relates to the current team, you're talking about Boone and Judge. I guess maybe you could bring the conversation full circle. The culture that they have this year, I think, is an example of how those two, as the captain and the manager, run a culture that can bring a lot of different people in and be okay. Because no one has ever really accused Marcus Stroman, Alex Verdugo, or Carlos Rodon of being like low maintenance. Uh, and I'm not criticizing these people. I'm just saying that they're people that have kind of been flagged as like these people need to be integrated intentionally into a culture. And there before the season, there were people like, "How's this?" Even Soto has that like, you've got your own thing going. You're such a celebrity. You're 25 years old. Didn't really work in San Diego in some ways with him integrating him into that culture. So there were, I guess, 4 players that the Yankees brought in that were like, okay, people around the game are wondering how's this all going to fit.
Yeah.
And I remember asking Boone about that in the offseason, and he was like, I trust our culture, I trust our system. And I think the Judge's captain style of leadership and his captaincy is perfect for that because it's like you be you, you be you, you be you. And you don't have to all be the one thing within the boundaries of you still have to shave your beard and all that. But Verdugo wearing his chains during the game, you're not seeing that in too many other Yankee eras, I don't think. And so there's a certain acceptance of personality, not just what you wear or how you look, but how you are uh, within the room. Stroman had his moments in the Mets clubhouse, and he's so happy here. You can tell. And that is because of the tone. That is the real value of a Boone, in my observation, and Judge, and the way that they work together to do that. Um, and I think that that's showing up this year, maybe, would be one last point I would make.
Yeah, I think if you're comparing Judge and Jeter from a leadership standpoint, I think on the surface people think like, oh, Judge is just doing a lot of the same things Jeter would do because when they're talking to the media, there are a lot of similarities, like
Sure.
sort of by the book comments and things like that. And then until Judge wins a championship, unfortunately, in the public, he'll never be viewed as good a leader as Jeter, and that's just because rings. But one fun example from the book was like when Sanchez is struggling and Judge is sort of like blocking the cameras of the Yes Network who are trying to like zoom in on on Sanchez in the dugout, and Cashman has to go to Judge and be like, you can't do that. Like these are
Yeah.
team operated cameras, blah blah blah. And Judge's like, I'm not going to stop doing this. This is like I'm trying to
Yep.
protect my players here. And I guess this is even before he was even named captain because
Yeah. 'Cause it's a couple years
yeah,
before.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting one
And to
because
compare that, sorry to interrupt you, compare that to how Jeter would not defend A Rod. And
that's
I
right.
know different, like Sanchez never badmouth Judge,
Yeah.
but like it's to compare those two things.
Yeah, absolutely. To give and it's important to raise that like what A Rod did to Jeter is not nothing,
Right.
and that in fairness to Jeter for sure, that should be part of the story. And every situation is different. But Judge, yeah, he's very to the point where he goes, "I'll be the bad guy," and I'll bet you if you're those camera operators that make a fraction of what he makes, you don't you're not thinking of that as a positive.
Right.
But Judge's focus is so on like I don't care about the media, I don't care about outside this, I care about this room. This is my responsibility. And Gary didn't need a million people watching him like upset at that moment, is what he's thinking. Um, and yeah, Jeter would do that selectively. I don't know anybody like he would defend Giambi and not A Rod. That's the kind of thing that would drive the front office crazy. But uh, I don't see that selectivity with Judge. I've never seen anyone that he's not been there for,
Right.
and that is one example.
Yeah, coming out of this, I mean, I kind of sense this anyway from not only talking to you, but just doing some other reading about Cashman. He's very loyal. I mean, he's basically he's not named Steinbrenner, but at this point, it's like it's pretty damn close with how long he's been in that organization, and like even
Yeah,
loyal to George in '05 when he could have made double the money and
double the
probably
money.
had
Yeah,
a fraction of the stress.
and the loyalty to Hal really came in after the 22 season when the job was not fun, and his contract is up. It's kind of maybe under appreciated, or appreciated is not the right word, but under noticed that he basically did the Judge free agency when he wasn't technically the GM.
Yeah,
And his contract expired in October. Corn Ferry, an prominent executive search firm, reaches out to Cashman. Cashman didn't reach out to them, but he did answer. And he's like, God, this job's really not pleasant right now. Um, but he basically ends up in that stream of what he's been doing his whole adult life. Because what is he going to do? Leave Hal Steinbrenner in the lurch for a GM search where Aaron Judge is a free agent? It just didn't feel right. But it was funny because his contract's up on October 31st. So all through that Judge process, he's not. I mean, he really wasn't under contract as the GM, and he's just doing it like because he felt like it was what he should do. And he didn't sign until December, even to the point where he was trying to bring in Sabian back at the time. Brian Sabian's under contract or is trying to sign a contract to come be in Cashman's front office, and but he's like, dude, I can't sign until you sign, and this is just going on for a while. Where the Judge stuff is happening, Cashman doesn't sign until December. At one point, I asked, like, "Are you a Yankee employee?" And he was like, "It's a funny story. Like Gene Afterman, who's the attorney, handles the contracts and paperwork stuff, actually had to call Cashman and say, just so you know, you are not under contract. You're an at-will employee." So it's like, do you have health insurance? Like it was like a weird situation.
yeah,
Anyway, he obviously re-signed, but that just shows you he's got a sense of unfinished business, wants to obviously keep winning at least one more, but also just wasn't the time to leave Hal. So sign up for another 4 years.
yeah. I mean, you can't compare him to because, like you said, he started as an intern transcribing voicemails like in the '80s. So it's like you're not going to be able to compare him to some of these other GMs who are bouncing from team to team, who probably are not going to have that loyalty to a team. When my contract's up, I'm not representing the
Yeah.
team anymore. Cash was just not thinking that way, which is why I don't think he's. I think barring something true illegal or something like actually bad happening that would cause him to be let go, like I don't see Hal letting him go, and I don't see him leaving until he's like truly done.
Which is probably coming up. Uh,
Maybe.
Probably, I would say not definitely, but there's certainly a belief around the organization that I mean a lot of this could go a lot of different ways. If Hal's loyal, but to a point, if they weren't consistently winning, obviously his responsibility, the organization, is to move on. So we'll see how the next couple of years go, but if they're in another World Series or continuing to play winning baseball, uh, there will seems like there will be more thoughts of that succession plan elevating Kevin Reese would become more front burner and how to figure that out. That continuity is something that they would abandon with great reluctance because it's so unique. No other organization has the consistency of um, philosophy that the Yankees have. The closest I could find was Oakland because Alderson gets there in the early '80s to Bean to what they have now. But with Bill Livesey and Gene Michael with the Yankees in the '70s, they go even further back. So to
Yeah.
throw that away and hire the hotshot assistant GM of the Rays or something like other teams do, that would be a huge decision for the Yankees. So yes, I'm agreeing with you. It certainly would be consistent with the way Hal operates, the organization operates, the family operates. That they would have um, the churn would come from like more consistency with what they already have and from within, and a transition from Cashman as the GM could happen within this contract, uh, to sort of set them up by the end of it. But we'll see how it all plays out. I mean, if they have a terrible finish to this year, if they're awful next year, I mean, it's no guarantee that things will be that the constant will remain. But that's the way it seems to be going.
Yeah. All right, Andy. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Really nice job on the book, and I encourage everyone out there to go pick it up. A lot of fun stuff in there.
Well, thank you for having me. This was, as I said, a refreshingly unique conversation about the book. So thank you for that, Andrew.
No problem. Good.
All right.